Please, before we dive into this wonderful story, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like, comment, and share with others. God bless you as you do so. Jackie Rooney wiped down the counter for the third time in 10 minutes, her eyes flicking to the clock. It was almost closing time at Mark's Diner, a small roadside restaurant where she had worked for the past 2 years. The night had been slow, which meant fewer customers and even fewer tips, something she couldn't afford right now. Rent was due next week, and she barely had enough saved to cover it. The bell above the door jingled. Jackie glanced up to see a tall, thin man hesitating at the entrance. His clothes were worn, his boots scuffed with dust, and his hair disheveled. He carried himself with quiet dignity, but exhaustion weighed on his face like a man who had spent years carrying a burden too heavy to bear. He stepped forward cautiously, stopping at the counter before pulling a few crumpled bills from his pocket. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice rough but polite. "What can I get for $5? Jackie glanced at the menu board. The cheapest meal was at least $8. She knew $5 wouldn't get him much, but something in his tired eyes made her decision easy. "You're in luck," she said, offering a warm smile. "We've got a special tonight. 1 full meal for $5. His eyes flickered with surprise, as if he wasn't used to kindness. "Really? Really?" Jackie said, already placing the order before he could argue. A few minutes later, she set a steaming plate of food in front of him. He stared at it, then at her. "You didn't have to do this," he murmured. Jackie shrugged. "Everyone deserves a warm meal." For a brief moment, a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He picked up his fork, but before he could take a bite, a sharp voice cut through the diner. Rick, the diner's manager, strode toward her, his expression a mix of annoyance and suspicion. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped, his eyes narrowing at the plate of food. Jackie's stomach tightened. "I paid for it myself," she said calmly. Rick scoffed. "We're not a charity. If you want to feed bums, do it somewhere else." Jackie's hands clenched into fists. "He's a veteran." Rick rolled his eyes. "Not my problem." Then, to everyone's shock, he grabbed the plate off the counter and tossed it into the trash. The diner fell silent. Jackie's breath caught as she watched the food slide into the garbage. The veteran sat still, his hands resting on his lap, his face unreadable. Rick dusted off his hands, as if he had just taken care of something dirty. "Now get back to work." Jackie's blood boiled. "You're a disgrace," she said through gritted teeth. Rick smirked. "And you're unemployed." For a moment, she thought she had misheard him, but then she saw the way he stood, arms crossed, smirk widening. "You're firing me?" she asked. Rick nodded. "That's right. Grab your things and get out." Jackie scanned the room, hoping for anyone to speak up. The other employees kept their heads down, too afraid to get involved. The few remaining customers sat frozen, whispering among themselves but saying nothing out loud. The veteran slowly stood, his gaze locked on Rick's. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Rick snorted. "I don't owe you anything, old man." The veteran didn't flinch. He nodded once, then turned to Jackie. "Thank you for your kindness." Jackie forced a small smile, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. "I wish I could have done more." "You already did more than most," he replied, before walking toward the door. Jackie turned back to Rick. "You're going to regret this." Rick let out a dry laugh. "Doubt it." Jackie grabbed her coat and stepped into the cold night, her mind spinning with uncertainty. She had no job, no backup plan, no idea what she was going to do next. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that within 24 hours, everything would change. Jackie walked home, her breath visible in the cold night air. The weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on her chest. She had lost her job not because she had done something wrong, but because she had done something right. It felt unfair. It was unfair. She reached her tiny apartment, barely more than a room with a bed and a small kitchenette. She tossed her coat over the chair and collapsed onto the bed. The stack of unpaid bills on the table caught her eye. Rent was due in a week, and now she had no way to pay it. Jackie barely slept that night. She kept replaying the moment in her head, Rick's smirk, the way he tossed the food into the trash, the quiet dignity on the veteran's face as he walked away. The injustice of it burned inside her. By morning, she had no choice but to go job hunting. She pulled on her warmest coat and stepped outside. She spent hours stopping by local businesses, filling out applications, but each conversation ended the same way. "We're not hiring right now." By noon, she found herself near Mark's diner again. She had no reason to go inside, but something made her linger across the street. The place looked the same, as if nothing had happened. Then a deep rumbling noise filled the air. She turned toward the sound. A military convoy, jeeps, armored vehicles, rolled down the main road. The town rarely saw anything like this. People stepped out of stores, staring as the line of vehicles slowed, then stopped right in front of Mark's diner. Jackie's stomach twisted. Inside the diner, Rick had been going about his day, as usual. He had no regrets about firing Jackie. If anything, he felt relieved. Employees were replaceable. The bell above the door jingled, and Rick turned, expecting another customer. Instead, a tall man in a decorated military uniform stepped inside. His presence commanded immediate attention. A dozen Marines marched in behind him, their combat boots striking the floor with an unshakable presence. The entire diner fell into a stunned silence. Rick blinked. "Can I help you?" The officer's sharp eyes scanned the diner. "We're looking for Jackie Rooney." The room went silent. Rick hesitated. She doesn't work here anymore." The officer's expression didn't change. "We know." Before Rick could ask anything else, the door opened again. James stepped inside, but this wasn't the same man from the night before. Today, he stood in full Marine dress uniform, ribbons and medals neatly displayed. Rick's jaw tightened. James didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he turned to the officer beside him. "This is Jackie Rooney," he said, his voice steady. "And these men? They're my brothers." Rick swallowed. "I don't understand." James let out a slow breath. "Yesterday, a young woman showed me kindness when no one else would. And for that, she lost her job." The officer took a step forward. "James isn't just any veteran. He's a decorated war hero. He saved dozens of Marines in combat, and the way he was treated here is unacceptable." Rick's hands clenched. Listen, I didn't know." "You didn't care," James interrupted. The tension in the room thickened. Then the officer turned toward the window and locked eyes with Jackie, who was still standing outside. "Jackie Rooney," he called out. Jackie froze. Every head turned to her. For a second, she considered walking away. Jackie hesitated for a moment, but something in Job Moon's voice, steady, firm, yet not unkind, compelled her forward. Instead of walking away, she stepped inside the diner, though the warmth of the room did little to calm her nerves. Rick's face had turned pale, his confidence visibly shaken. Job Moon offered a small smile. "Miss Rooney, we heard about what happened yesterday. More importantly, we heard about what you did for James." Jackie glanced at James, who gave her a subtle nod. Job continued, "We need people like you, people who do the right thing even when there's no reward. We'd like to offer you a job." Jackie's breath caught. "A job?" "Not in the military," he clarified. "We run a program that helps veterans transition back into civilian life. We need compassionate people to assist with counseling, job placement, and community support. You'd be helping people like James get back on their feet." Jackie's mind reeled. Just yesterday, she had lost everything, and now the United States Marine Corps was offering her an opportunity that could change her life. Rick scoffed. "You can't be serious. She's just a waitress." Job Moon barely glanced at him. "And yet, she did more for one of our men in a single night than you have in your entire life." Silence fell over the diner. Jackie looked down at the business card in her hand, her heart pounding. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been fired. Now, she was being given a chance at something meaningful. Rick let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and offer her a job. She's not qualified." "On the contrary, Mr. Max," Job said coolly. "She is more qualified than you'll ever understand." He turned back to Jackie, his expression softer. "We aren't offering this as charity, Miss Rooney. We need people like you, People with heart, integrity, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. Jackie swallowed hard. Those words struck deep. She had always believed in doing the right thing, even when it cost her more than it gave. And yet, here were these men, powerful, respected, disciplined, saying that it mattered. That she mattered. James stepped forward, his presence grounding. These men are the reason I'm still standing here today. I served with them. I bled with them. And yesterday, for the first time in years, someone showed me the same loyalty I once gave to them. His gaze was unwavering. You didn't just buy me a meal. You reminded me that people still care. Rick scoffed. Oh, give me a break. James's jaw tightened, but it was Job Moon who responded. Do you find this funny, Mr. Max? His tone was calm, yet there was something dangerous beneath it. Rick's smugness faltered. You tossed away a good employee because she showed compassion to a man who served his country. And now, that very same man is standing here in full uniform with his brothers at his side. Tell me, does that still seem funny to you? Rick opened his mouth, but no words came out. Job took a slow step forward, his presence overwhelming. Let me make something very clear, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet every person in the diner could hear him. James Smith isn't just any veteran, he's a decorated war hero. He saved lives. He sacrificed more than you'll ever comprehend. And instead of honoring him, you humiliated him. His eyes flickered to Jackie. And instead of recognizing loyalty in your own employee, you threw her out. A murmur rippled through the diner. Customers who had been silent before now whispered among themselves, shaking their heads at Rick in quiet disapproval. Rick shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know. You didn't care, James corrected. And that's worse. The tension thickened. For the first time, Rick looked truly unsettled. Jackie finally found her voice. I don't need an apology, she said, her gaze steady. Because the truth is, I don't regret what I did. If I had to do it again, I would. And if that means I don't belong here, then so be it. Job Moon studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. That's exactly why we want you on our team. Jackie looked down at the business card again, gripping it tightly. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind of emotions, fear, anger, hopelessness. But now, for the first time, she felt something else, hope. Where would I be working? She asked. A hint of a smile touched Job's lips. We have a program that helps veterans transition back into civilian life. It's a non-profit, but it's supported by the military. We provide housing, job training, and counseling, things that men like James need to rebuild their lives. And we need people like you to help run it. Jackie's breath hitched. She had spent her life scraping by, working dead-end jobs just to survive. And now, she was being offered something more, something meaningful. She glanced at James, who gave her a knowing nod. You don't have to decide right now, Job Moon said. Think about it. If you're interested, come see us tomorrow morning. Jackie took a deep breath, her heart pounding. Then, with newfound certainty, she nodded. I'm in. With that, Job turned on his heel and walked toward the exit, his men following behind. James lingered for a moment, meeting Jackie's gaze one last time. You deserve more than what this place gave you, he said. Then he too walked out. The moment they were gone, the silence in the diner became almost suffocating. Rick exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. Well, that was dramatic. Jackie turned to him, her expression unreadable. You should be ashamed of yourself. Rick scoffed. Oh, please. You think this changes anything? You think those guys are going to suddenly make your life perfect? He gestured toward the door. They'll forget about you in a week. People always do. Jackie didn't respond right away. Instead, she smiled. Not the polite, customer service smile, but something different. Something stronger. No, she said softly. They won't. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the diner, stepping into the crisp evening air. She looked down at the business card once more, her heart pounding. For the first time in years, she felt like her life was about to change. And for once, it was for the better. Your role would be to help with outreach, assist in job placement, and most importantly, be a face of compassion for these men and women. Jackie hesitated. I don't have any experience in this kind of work. You have the most important kind of experience, Moon said. You cared, and sometimes that's all it takes. Jackie exhaled slowly. And James? He's already signed on, Moon said with a small smile. He'll be working here too. Turns out he's got a lot to offer, just needed someone to remind him of that. A warmth spread through Jackie's chest. The idea of working alongside James, of helping people like him, suddenly didn't feel so foreign. In fact, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She nodded more to herself than to Moon. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. The job grinned. Welcome to the team. Over the next few weeks, Jackie threw herself into the job. She learned fast how to navigate paperwork, how to coordinate with businesses, how to listen. She met veterans from all walks of life, some who had just returned from service, others who had been struggling for decades. Each of them had a story. Each of them had a battle they were still fighting. And for the first time, Jackie felt like she was making a real difference. One afternoon, as she was organizing a job fair, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find James standing there, looking sharper than she had ever seen him. He wore a neatly pressed polo shirt with the organization's logo on the chest, his hair trimmed, his posture strong. Hey, he said. Hey yourself, Jackie replied, smiling. How's it going? James exhaled, looking around at the busy room. It's strange, he admitted. For years, I thought my life was over, that no one cared. And then you came along. He met her gaze. You changed everything. Jackie's throat tightened. I just did what anyone should do. Maybe, James said. But you are the only one who did it. Jackie didn't know how to respond to that. Instead, she simply reached out and squeezed his hand. That evening, as she locked up the office, she stepped outside and looked at the horizon. The sky was painted in deep oranges and purples, the last rays of sunlight stretching across the town. She had once thought of this place as nothing more than a stopping point in her life. Now it felt like something more, a second chance, a new beginning. She pulled her phone from her pocket and scrolled to Job Moon's contact. After a moment, she typed a message. Thank you for believing in me. A reply came almost instantly. We don't leave good people behind. Jackie smiled, slipping her phone back into her pocket. She had spent years thinking she was just another face in the crowd, just another struggling worker trying to get by. Now, she was part of something bigger. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged. Jackie sat in her office, staring at the stack of papers on her desk. It had been 6 months since she had taken the job at the Veteran Transition Center, and every day since had been a whirlwind. The work was exhausting, sometimes overwhelming, but it was also the most fulfilling thing she had ever done. She had gone from serving meals at a diner to helping people rebuild their lives. Outside, the hallways buzzed with activity. Veterans came and went, some meeting with job counselors, others attending therapy sessions, and some just stopping by for a cup of coffee and a conversation. Jackie had quickly learned that for many of them, just having someone to listen was as important as any job placement or housing assistance. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see James standing there, hands in his pockets, a familiar but more confident look on his face. Got a minute? He asked. Jackie smiled and gestured to the chair across from her. For you? Always. James stepped inside and sat down, his gaze thoughtful. Tomorrow's the big day, he said. Jackie nodded. Tomorrow was the center's first official community event and open house, meant to connect veterans with employers, support groups, and the community. It was her project, and she had poured her heart into it. Everything's ready, she said. At least, I think it is. James chuckled. You'll do great. She studied him for a moment. His transformation over the past months had been remarkable. When she first met him, he had been lost, just trying to survive another day. Now, he was working at the center, mentoring younger veterans, and even leading an outreach program for those still struggling. I'm proud of you, James, she said. His smile was small but genuine. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Jackie shook her head. No, you wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. You just needed someone to remind you of what you were capable of. James nodded, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. It goes both ways, you know. You helped me, but this place helped you too. Jackie knew he was right. She had started this job thinking she was just helping others, but in reality, it had saved her too. She had spent so many years barely getting by, believing she had no real purpose. Now, she woke up every morning knowing she was making a difference. A silence stretched between them, comfortable, understanding. Then James stood. "See you tomorrow," he said, heading for the door. Jackie watched him go, then exhaled. Tomorrow was important, not just for the center, but for every veteran who would walk through those doors looking for a new beginning. The next day, Jackie arrived early. The center had been transformed, banners hung from the walls, booths were set up with job recruiters and support organizations, and volunteers bustled about, setting out refreshments and organizing paperwork. By noon, the first veterans began arriving. Jackie watched as they moved from table to table, speaking with employers, connecting with resources. Some were hesitant, uncertain. But that's why she was here. She moved through the crowd, greeting people, answering questions. She saw James laughing with a group of younger veterans, sharing stories. She spotted Job Moon speaking with a government official, likely working on expanding the center's funding. Then she saw someone familiar at the entrance. A man stood just outside, hesitating, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his worn jacket. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure if he should step inside. Jackie knew that look. She walked over and smiled warmly. "First time here?" The man glanced at her, then at the bustling room behind her. "Oh, yeah," he admitted. "I wasn't sure if this place was for me." Jackie nodded. "I get that. But let me tell you something, everyone in there has felt the same way at some point. And every single one of them is glad they walked through that door." The man hesitated a moment longer, then exhaled and stepped inside. Jackie watched as a volunteer greeted him, guiding him toward one of the booths. A feeling of quiet satisfaction filled her chest. This was why she was here.